Jordan, welcome to the show. So great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me today.
I see it in a lot of the young entrepreneurs I work with or my students that it requires creativity and problem solving, right? Just that very activity that they're engaged in, but it seems like you can't force it, right? The more you force it, the harder it gets. And I know you teach mindful creativity as part of a professional toolkit. So talk to us about what that looks like in action.
Yeah, I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I think particularly for people who aren't artists or who don't work in a creative practice, the first hurdle they come to is, well, this doesn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. Well, this isn't what I had in my head. Don't worry about it. It doesn't need to. That's not the point. It's not the point to make something beautiful or to make something perfect. It's actually getting in touch with your physical senses, and it's being playful again.
How can business owners begin to trust their body's energetic intelligence instead of just relying on their logical brain? Today's guest is Jordan, and she is an abstract painter, writer, and digital producer. She's passionate about all aspects of creativity and incorporates the practice of mindfulness into many of her programs. Jordan leads creative teams, and over the last 15 years has led, coached, and developed creative professionals from the Asia Pacific region. Her works of fiction, including her latest book, Bitroux, High Country, explore the relationship between language, sound, and the human body. She's interested in exploring the possibility and eventualities of a language based on vibration and the possibility for this language to transcend human perception and allow us to engage with otherworld consciousness. Jordan's artwork showcases her love of color, deep connection with nature, her heightened spiritual experience of consciousness, and expresses a dialogue about our connection with otherworld intelligence. Jordan, welcome to the show. So great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction and for having me today.
Yeah. So I was reading your bio and your information, and I find it really interesting, especially with the language of vibration. And we'll get to that later because I think that's super interesting. I've got a background as a speech language pathologist, so I kind of like language and vibration.
Fantastic.
So it's really interesting, and I definitely I get it for sure.
Fantastic.
But I wanted to start by talking a little bit, like focusing it a little bit for our audience on entrepreneurship and business ownership. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was, how can business owners begin to trust their body's energetic intelligence instead of just relying on their logical brains?
Yes,
I think that's a big thing for entrepreneurs.
It's massive, and it's a really great question. So I'm so pleased that we can have this conversation. So I think one of the things is that we forget how often we get stuck in our logical mind, because the logical mindset is just the natural landscape in terms of how we work in business and our 9 to 5 life. And I think we forget that that's not the only way of being. We have another way of living, which is far more intuitive. And I'm able to access that on a daily basis through my creative work. So my creative practice is what I allow into my life to help me detach from all of those busy brain elements, the logical thinking, and get back to responding to things through my body, through my imagination, and through tactile work. So once we start activating our body's capability to lead us and allow those senses to come through, I think it allows us into a much more healthy space, because we're balancing, the intuitive and the logical. And I think it's tough. I think there's so much coming at us in every day. And, for entrepreneurs, there's so much to do. And I think, I can tap into the entrepreneurial energy very well because it's exciting. Doing new things, bringing new things into the world. Yeah. It's amazing. And entrepreneurs have such vision and such drive and passion to get things out into the world. And I think that I love it. It's exciting, and it's a drive that really feeds us, because it can be very nourishing, but it can also allow us to go at a very, very fast pace. And I think sometimes that fast pace is what also leads us to tip into doing things, like really rigid schedules, because we've got so much to fit into the day. We try and just make the most out of every single minute, and we often try to do that by really, big schedules, time blocking, making every second count, but that's not relaxing at all. And even though it can be nourishing from that connection we get to our work, I think it's really helpful to think about what the balance looks like and how we can just start to step out of that busyness and just return to a space of quiet. And that is really challenging. And I think it gets more challenging every single day because, you know, every day there's more coming at us, particularly at the moment with there's so much developing, you know, particularly in the AI space, in the tech space, you know, there's a lot. And I think everyone is really trying to feel into how they can keep up. But I think we have to find a way to balance that for sustainability, for longevity, for, you know, not getting to a space of burnout. I think it's okay to take a breath, and I think it's okay to do that often, you know, each hour and every day, to just try and recalibrate and make sure that we don't just go into complete overwhelm. I think that's an unhappy and unhealthy place to be. And I think it also blocks us from being receptive to things that come at us through intuition and imagination. I think if we want to access that those pathways, we need to be in a more restful state. And I know this because I know how hard it is to be creative when you're on a deadline. So I think the more pressure that we put on ourselves, the harder it is to tap into those spaces inside of us and in our energetic ecosystem that can be slower to surface. And I think the more we want to delve into what comes up through the subconscious, through our intuition, we really need to give that time and space. So we need to create a really nice environment for that to happen. And I think that's one of the challenges for entrepreneurs, to understand and to enable that in the midst of everything else that's going on in the day. That could be tough, but I think it's very worthwhile.
Yeah, I see it in a lot of the young entrepreneurs I work with or my students, that, you know, it requires creativity and problem solving, right? Just that very activity that they're engaged in, but it seems like you can't force it, right? The more you force it, the harder it gets. And I know you teach mindful creativity as part of a professional toolkit. So talk to us about what that looks like in action, like something like, you know, somebody who needs to solve a problem, they need some creativity, but they find that they can't force it. What does that look like for them?
I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I think particularly for people who aren't artists or who don't work in a creative practice, they think about, you know, making something or being creative, and you can come up against a lot of roadblocks. You can really think, well, I'm not creative. And I have a lot of adults who come into my studio, and I love teaching adults because they, you know, as adults, we've got so many unique experiences and we come with so much. But that can also mean that we have really high expectations of ourselves. And the higher our expectations, the tougher it is when things don't turn out the way that we want. And for people who make something, you know, they come to the studio and they paint something, they get the first hurdle they come to is, well, this doesn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. Well, this isn't what I had in my head. And what I encourage people to consider is, don't worry about it. It doesn't need to. That's not the point. It's not the point to make something beautiful or to make something perfect. It's actually getting in touch with your physical senses, and it's being playful again. And getting adults to come back to a place of play is a wonderful invitation, but it's not necessarily one that comes easily because we're used to doing something and having a result. And actually coming to a place where we're just doing it because it's relaxing, it's fun, it lets us turn off, it lets us relax. Yeah, that's a different mindset. So I encourage people to just start and not put pressure on themselves. And one of the aspects of mindfulness that I think is a really helpful thing to consider is beginner's mind. So you'll know the beginner's mind is just about turning up without expectation and seeing what happens. And that actually is a wonderful way to have an adventure and to be okay with not knowing how things will turn out. And I think that's a really good skill set for this day and age, to do things without having to think that you know what's going to happen, because it opens us up to so many opportunities. And I think in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, it's a really good skill set, not just for, you know, using art as a way to relax, but bringing that skill set into your daily life. What happens if I ask more questions? What happens if I tell people, I actually don't know how this is going to turn out? What do you think? And you create an environment where it's okay to play. I mean, look, I think entrepreneurs do this all the time with, you know, testing hypotheses and testing things out in market. So it's not new to entrepreneurs, but I think we can all do this a lot better in terms of just coming and playing and seeing what happens and going with the flow. And, you know, in the studio, I practice through having about 100 different artworks going on at the same time and not working on them for very long at all, just coming with one color and doing a bit here and not having to think that I know how it's going to turn out. I never know what's happening with my artworks. I never know what I'll end up with, but it's fun being on the journey. It gives me a very dynamic, interesting space to work in. And so I like to create that for other people as well.
Yeah, it's about enjoying the process, right? Enjoying the journey. And I think giving ourselves that permission or that space to play, because, even when you're talking about testing hypothesis and A/B testing in entrepreneurship, it still is approached as work and not so much play.
True.
Right? Like, and if you use the word hypothesis, it's science,
Yeah.
it's not play, it's not art or whatever, right? So I think it's super important. But I think one of the things that's fascinating to me about tapping into this ability to play or giving ourselves permission to play is that it opens up intuition, right? Like you can start to tap into intuition. So I was wondering if you could share a time maybe when your intuition led you to make a decision that completely defied logic. Like if you were approaching it from a logical perspective, you might be like, there's no way I should do that. But your intuition led you in a different way.
Look, I think that as an artist, I am in that intuitive space quite often. And I think what that does is it gives me information that can be really challenging. And it's hard to sit with the information that comes through from your intuition versus the information that you would have from your logical mindset. And I think that's one of the challenges. So for an example that I can give is, I'm very creative in the morning. So I'll get up and paint from 4 o'clock in the morning to 6 o'clock in the morning because I'm coming out of that dream state. I'm, really tapped in, whatever. And then I will go for coffee. So my coffee is the thing that I love to do after I've been painting. I've been living in a different place for the last year, and I love to be at the beach in the morning. So I go to the ocean. That's one of the places I really connect. But when I moved to the place that I'm living now, we're very close to a whole range of gorgeous beaches on the Australian Central Coast. And I started visiting a new beach, which is Shelley Beach. And as soon as I arrived on this beach, and it happened a number of times, I was overwhelmed with this sense of there is something different going on. And that was intuitive information coming through to me that I couldn't logically explain, but I could feel it in so many different ways. I could feel my body responding to the ocean. I could feel my senses tingling in a heightened state of awareness that I really wasn't expecting. I hadn't planned. I didn't go to the beach with the intention of having any kind of experience other than just being near the water because I love it. And I think that's an experience where I was already in my intuitive state. I went to a space and had an experience where I really felt like I was opening up to energy in the environment that was inexplicably present, but overwhelmingly present. I felt completely overwhelmed with it. And I think that's one experience for me to share that, I really felt like I was tapping into extraterrestrial energy. I really, really felt like that there was potentially a portal or a pathway where there was energetic energy coming and going. And there's no other way that I can sit with that experience other than to just let that be the case. And, if you approach it from a logical mindset, you would say, well, you don't have anything to go on. You didn't see anything. You don't have any physical evidence. There is nothing to say that actually happened. And that, I think, is what is one of the tough things about sitting with our intuitive knowledge is that it's really hard when we try and rationalize it. And we often need to try and rationalize something to feel comfortable with it, to feel like there's an explanation for it. And sometimes we just can't. And I think this is one of the challenges and opportunities because, it's one of the challenges as humans is to sit with this space that we don't necessarily know what's going on. We don't necessarily have all the answers. We can't, everything that we've got is a hypothesis, really. We don't, it's all hypothesis. And I think that I think is also an invitation to freedom, actually, and to independent thinking, because we also have something in our bodies, which I think is an ability to resonate. So I think for me, the way that I have found a way through the world is to really trust resonance. And resonance is, I think, the best way that we can kind of evaluate the information that comes to us, both through the logical channels, through our intellect and our brain, and also through intuition, through our body and our senses and our imagination, because we have a lot of this coming to us through every kind of channel of information that comes to us. We have news channels that are quite likely to give us incorrect information, and we have fictional worlds that may not actually be telling us anything truthful. But I think there's a lot between. So there's a lot. I write fiction, and I think that there can be a lot of truth that comes through in fictions through metaphor, parable, but also just lived experience. People find a way to express that, and the way that they do that is through fiction, because it's a little bit more safe and more tangible. So sorry, I'm probably going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but I think that, what I came back to with that experience of being at the ocean is that resonated as a truth for me. And I encourage everyone to find their way into understanding and using resonance as a pathfinding technique in the world. And intuition is a very strong part of that. And the more we use it, the more we get comfortable with it. And even if we don't understand what our intuition is telling us all the time, that's okay. We can make friends with our intuition. We can start to learn tools to tap into it, and we can balance it. We don't always have to go with logic or intuition. We can find a way to have both come into our sense-making capabilities.
Yeah, and I think I'm with you there on just being near the ocean or on the beach. That's where I get a lot of those feelings similarly, right? I just feel very connected there.
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to be the beach. It could be the mountains. Could be a forest, could be, wherever you feel that, right? And you mentioned resonance and kind of, feeling the resonance, but it's two ways too, right? We're resonating out at the same time that we're receiving information, and it is actual information, right? And I think this kind of leads into the discussion of the vibrational language that we talked about earlier, that I mentioned earlier. So yeah, I'd love for you to just pick that up and what do you mean by that, and how can we use it? How important is it? And that sort of thing.
Yes. So, I mean, look, I think resonance is about vibration, but resonance for me is what vibrates truthfully in my body. So for me, if I resonate with something, I'm connecting with it holistically. So I'm using all of my sensory capabilities, my imagination, my body as a sensory tool, my knowledge, my likes and, my passions. And if I resonate with something, I see that as being truthful and honest. And it is an intuitive feeling, because it isn't based on one thing or the other. It's an amassed feeling of I resonate, I connect, I agree. And it is that agreement that I think is very valuable, because we all, I think, seek resonance. We seek to resonate and vibrate with peers and our tribe and our network, because we want to be amongst like-minded people that share our visions and our values and our understandings. And I think that's where resonance takes us. Resonance takes us to a path of finding our place in the world, where we have people that we can build further resonance with. And the more we can build that resonant community of beings, I think the stronger that vibration is. And for me, I've explored it through my book. So in Bitroux, I explore the story of Merowak, who is a metalsmith. And this actually came through my fine arts degree. I actually studied metalwork in college. So I was that metalsmith at one time. But anyway, cool. So when I was thinking about my book and when I was writing, and I'm an intuitive writer, I don't have a plan for what I'm writing, but I was really exploring this idea of what happens when you're in deep creative work. And I explored this through the character of Merowak, who is my metalsmith, who was able to start seeing otherworld entities deep in the middle of the night, after he'd been doing his metalsmithing sculpture work for hours and hours. So he'd come out of this studio time of just being completely immersed in his work, and then he would start to see these blue energies around him, always on the periphery of his vision, not directly in front of him, but just always on the periphery. And I think that's what happens when our sensory environment changes. We start to see these things. They don't come at us full frontal. They come at us just, out of, sight, not when we're looking at it or paying full attention. And the more I explored this story, the more I thought about that creative energy that allows us to really tap into our body's sense of knowledge. And I think, again, it's something that we're not taught how to do. And this has really frustrated me throughout my lifetime, is that we're not taught how to feel resonance. We're not taught how to intuitively feel into our body and intuitively feel into the energetic landscape. And that's what I think that I have been doing, and that my character has been doing, is feeling into the landscape. And I think that resonance helps us do this. Sorry, I'm still having this challenge here. So I think your question was, what does resonance mean to me? Why is it important? And how does that move into a different kind of language? And for me, I think resonance is learning how to trust information that comes to us through our body. And again, I actually don't think it's very easy to tap into that body when we are when we're in our logical mindset. So I call that our daylight thinking space. So we get up, we have our coffee, we go out into the day, we get into routines and tasks and activity. That is that's a very different space. I think we are far more well placed to tap into resonance when we are shutting down exterior noise. So when we shut down our tech, when we have quiet time, when we meditate, we are moving into a deeper state of awareness. And that is when our body starts to talk to us. And that's when that intuition starts to come through. We are tapping more into our imagination. We can start to have a different kind of sensory experience. And for me, that is where resonance starts to guide us into different pathways of experience. And for me, I really felt, and I really feel, that there is a lot of the universe that we can tap into when we are in that resonant state, and we can start to tap into awareness. For me, it's extraterrestrial awareness. For other people, it might just be learning how to connect with animals more. It might be learning how to connect with the natural environment more. I think that we've got this incredible vibrating world all around us. Everything vibrates. We are all vibrating. And so having pathways and tools to tap into that resonance is how we start to commune and connect more broadly, I feel, outside of our general state of awareness. And I think it's a wonderful landscape to start to connect to. It is so broad. There is so much out there. It is so diverse. Why would we not want to take that journey of being able to connect with each other, with the world, with the universe, with every kind of being that exists in a deeper state? But it is a stepping stone process, I think. And I think resonance is one of those first steps that allows us to build trust in that kind of sensory experience.
So resonance is it's interesting because you said, when you feel things that kind of resonate truly with you, right? And I think that depending on what frequency you're vibrating at, the resonance you're putting out, you're going to attract that, right? Yes. So I think it's almost like a law of nature that you are going to get the things that resonate with you, because that's how resonance works, right? Yes. So the vibrations I'm sending out, or the signals I'm sending out, I'm going to get that back. And I think that's what a lot of entrepreneurs experience, or like maybe when times are really tough and they can't elevate themselves, or they can't have positive thoughts, everything's doom and gloom, everything's bad. They're going to experience more of that, because that's the vibrational signal they're sending out, and that's what they're going to attract. And am I on the right track there, or what do you think of that?
I agree. And actually, I think that's why mindfulness and mindful creativity is a really good housekeeping practice, because I think I'm always thinking in terms of stepping stones, and I think it's very hard to go from one extreme state of awareness to another extreme state. So I think that state where you might not be in the best or the highest vibrational state, where you might be more in that kind of, and it happens to everyone, and we all go through these highs and lows on a daily basis. And I think mindfulness is a way of being aware of your own thoughts, and mindful creativity is basically doing creative work to help you stop and create space to have that awareness. So I think one of the techniques that I love is the practice of it. It is a mindfulness practice of non-judgment, and non-judgment it's easy to say, but it's harder to be aware of how often we do this in daily life. And mindfulness helps us take a step back from our own thoughts and observe them. And that observational space where we're objectively seeing what our own mind is doing is a very helpful thing for us all to be practicing, because it helps us be aware when we're stepping into that more of a kind of a state where we're not at our highest vibration, and to just pause, and to be aware of it and have that really nice moment to say, right, I'm aware that this isn't my best mindset, my best headspace, and I can do something about it. So we are all owners and co-creators of our lives. We have the power to take control, but we have to have that awareness first. So we have to have that freedom and that flexibility to step out of that space and recalibrate. One of the things that I also think through that process of non-judgment is, once we are aware of how much we are judging ourselves and others, we can start having different, we can change our self-talk. So we can, and self-talk can be a number of different things, particularly when it's been judgmental. I didn't do that well enough. I'm a failure at this. That hasn't succeeded. This isn't working. Once we start moving into a space of non-judgment, it can be more about, well, I've tried one thing and it's one of 10 that I'm going to try. So I know that that's done, and I've done my due diligence with that. But there are there are 9 more things to try. So I'm going to think about those 9 things now. It's about diverting our planning and our thinking. And I think that is helpful as well. And I use that as a tool with students in the studio, where we all collaborate on an artwork, and no one is allowed to say, I like it or I don't like it. So everyone steps back, and we have to ask questions. Why did you make that mark? What were you thinking with that color? What was your thought process? And that's a far more productive train of thought to say, what's going on here? What led to this? What were you doing? What was I doing? There are lots of different answers. So that leads us into a better stepping stone space to start moving back into that kind of more higher vibrational state. So I think there's ways to keep moving up and down the continuum, and awareness and self-awareness is a really important part of that.
Yeah, the idea of not putting a judgment on something and just observing it or asking a question about it, right? So instead of saying that was terrible or that was bad, because that's very subjective. Somebody else might not think it was terrible or bad. They could look at it completely differently, but just, observing it objectively and maybe describing what you're actually seeing without giving any quality to it and asking questions about it. I think that's really great advice. That's a good practice for sure.
I think one of the things as a writer as well that I also explore with my own work and my students is the ability for us to recalibrate our own stories. So, and this is another aspect of mindful creativity, and it comes into this idea that I am not my story and you are not your story either. Because with the ego, and with our own self-talk, sometimes we can forget that the things that we tell each other and the things that we think about ourselves are not a set part of our identity. So we don't always have to be the thing that we think we are, or we have told people that we were, and that can be incredibly liberating. So we have the opportunity as individuals to always reassess, is this story still true? Am I still this person, or have I grown? And detaching a story from our identity helps us create new stories. So I may have had a story of I was a failure at that, or I was a success at that, or I've had this experience and this is how I live my life. We can set those down any time that we like, when we feel that we're ready to. Sometimes it's a breakthrough moment. Sometimes it's a quiet moment. But having the moment to sit with the stories that we tell ourselves is a really powerful way to think about, do I need to redefine my own story for my own health and well-being? What is the story of the new me? What is the story of me having learnt all of the things from the last year? So an example of this is so obviously I'm in the Australia Pacific region. So when it comes to December, we are at the summer solstice.
Right.
So I have a journey to the summer solstice, which allows people to really come to that time in December at the end of the year and go through a meditation process, which is a journey to the summer solstice, which just lets us release the year. And we can forget how much goes on in a single year and how much we change, we grow, we learn, we evolve. And that's a really great time to reset and say, actually, I'm now a different person because I have gone through all of these journeys in the last year. I can now recalibrate how I think about myself, how I talk about myself, and that gives us a whole new way to move into the new year with a refreshed sense of purpose and self. And I think that's just that, going back to that hygiene space, we forget how much we carry around with us, and we are allowed to release the things that are no longer serving us as well.
Yeah, storytelling, right? There's so much, you hear a lot about storytelling in terms of just you being the storyteller about your product, your service, your business, your life. But if we are truly the author of our story, we can tell the story about ourselves, right? So,
Exactly.
and I think you've talked about sacred storytelling.
Yes.
Yeah, so what does that mean to you, and how can entrepreneurs use it to deepen their connection to purpose?
I am lucky to have a number of people who have been clients and friends in my life and really highly attuned to the spiritual. And we've been having a discussion around the fact that sacred stories are a way to bring back into the everyday world the things that we can struggle to talk about. So, this is one of the things that I think we are redefining as a civilization in terms of what is it okay to talk about, and for a long time people have said, polite society leaves religion and politics off the table. We don't talk about these things. But there is also the argument that because we don't feel that it's polite to talk about these things, we're not very good at talking about them. We don't have really good skill
True.
sets. And so even with emerging spiritual ideas, we don't feel that we can bring those into our professional life, our working life, because it's a little bit taboo. So the idea of
Hmm.
say, and so I've started this conversation in a new podcast called Sacred Stories of the Spirit. And this is around, the first series is really talking with two of my most respected peers. One's a former doctor and one's a PhD. And we're talking about the history of sacred stories, when they're good for us, when they can challenge us and become impeding. There's a lot in it, but I think sacred storytelling is really, for me, for example, writing my book was a practice of me connecting to my sacred story. It was a way to connect to a sense of what was true for me. And I think there is a real discussion to be had around subjective truth as well. And that probably ties back to resonance. So, I think we all have the license to find out what is our state of resonance, what is true for us, how can we live in that truth, and celebrate it. There's so much that comes to us that may sit out of other people's normal experience or everyday experience, but I think we can all define what is right for us, and it's liberating. So sacred stories for me is that ability to connect and commune with the universe. And for me, communing with the universe means adopting a mindset that the universe is generous, it is collaborative, it is supportive, and it is listening. And we can have conversations through all of our senses with the universe and everything that exists in it, in and outside of spoken word language, in and outside of written text or any kind of, words we may know, because there's a much broader scope of language and communication out there that's, it's vibration, it's resonance, it's feeling, it's intuition, it's imagination. And that is a much richer way of living, I think.
Yeah, it really, and just the idea or the thought that the universe is always conspiring in your favor.
I love
Right? I
that.
love that. That's
Isn't
like
that the
one of my
best way to
favorite.
live?
Yeah, it really is.
Why would you not
Yeah.
want to believe that?
Yeah, yeah, I do believe that. One of the things I always say to myself, and well, we talked about resonance before, and I know that one of the highest vibration emotions is gratitude. So I try to make sure I incorporate a gratitude practice. So I am
Yes.
resonating the things that I want to receive. But yeah, I often say to myself that, my life is amazing and I don't know how it can get any better, but I'm really excited to find out, and
Yeah.
just bring it,
Yeah.
So yeah,
Absolutely.
so the universe is conspiring in our favor. And that's, I always try to keep that in mind, even when it may not seem like it.
Yes, yes. And even I think that's the thing, even when it may not seem like it, I think, I've heard a great affirmation. Everything that's happening for me is happening for my highest purpose. And I think if we
Hmm.
take that mindset, it's empowering. We can learn from
Hmm.
everything. And I think that's one of the things that I mean, I love learning. And
Hmm.
I love the idea that we continue to learn all of our lives. And even as a teacher, one thing we have in New Zealand is this this word called ako, so AKO. It's the Maori word for learner, but it has a different meaning in the sense that the learner is also the teacher. And it's this beautiful exchange where even as you teach, you learn, and even as you learn, you teach. So it's this reciprocal relationship that I think is so true of life. Even as we teach, we are learning from the people that we are that we're with, and everyone has the chance to teach us something, and it makes it very democratic. I think that you don't have to go out and pay a lot of money to get a degree to think that you're learning. I think every moment is an opportunity to learn if we're open to it, and if we offer that invitation to participate in the learning.
Yeah, I've often found that I learn a lot when I teach. It's really quite incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And one of the things about resonance and manifestation that I think a lot of people seem to misunderstand or get wrong is it always seems to be about, or not always, but it often seems to be about material things, right? So like the book The Secret, for example, I think it misled people into thinking, well, I've just got to think positive thoughts about the thing that I want, and then it has no choice but to come to me, right? But that's not really how it works, because you've got to feel it, you've got to understand why, and that may not actually be the thing you need, right, for your best and highest purpose.
Yes.
So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, like maybe the misuse of what they would think of as manifestation techniques and how it actually works and that sort of thing.
Yes, I mean, look, what I think I've been sitting with and learning about really is our soul's readiness for any experience. So I think with manifestation, it really is about, on that deeper level, of actually really being ready for it and being an experience that we can expand for. So I think to have that experience of manifestation is also to have an expanded sense of being where we're inviting it in, and we create space for it. So creating space for more is actually not, I think there's a shift there that is quite deep and profound that people may skip over from time to time, and I probably do all the time as well. But I think, are we really ready for this? Because, there's a lot that's written about, people don't fear failure. People actually fear success more than failure, because you have to be visible. You have to, you're there standing up for what you believe in. People are going to be looking at you. You're going to be in plain sight. And that is terrifying, sometimes. So I think, are we ready?
Yeah, for sure. Wow. Well, Jordan, this was a really fun conversation. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I had, or anything that you would like people to know?
I actually just wanted to ask you quickly, really,
Sure.
you mentioned that you're a speech pathologist, or you have been in the past. And I'm really interested in your thinking on what do you hear when you hear me talk about my ideas on resonance and communing with the universe? What comes to you from your background in that space?
Yeah. Well, so language is universal, right? We're communicating somehow, whether we're communicating from our heart fields, our magnetic fields from our heart, or with our mouths and that type of thing. So I don't know that much about it, but I would be shocked if there wasn't, of course, a way we are communicating beyond Earth. I mean, even just with our thoughts, right? Because if you do believe in the one field, right, that everything is connected, or even Einstein's spooky action at a distance, right, where two particles are still combined no matter how far apart they are, where distance is really just abstract, then we can communicate with our thoughts and our vibrations and our magnetic field. So I don't know enough about it to give you a super intelligent response, but I would be shocked if there wasn't something to it.
Yeah, thank you. I just love having this conversation. I wish, my big wish is to have more of these conversations with more people, because it's, I'm not sure that any of us could consider ourselves experts at this stage, but it's one of those things that I keep coming back to. Why would we not want this? Why would we not want this broader scope of communion and connection and understanding? And, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean that's what we want as humans, as individuals, right? And I think a lot of times when we feel separate from other people, it's really just because we're trying to connect more with our people, right? So we have our people and not our people. It makes it easier for us to connect with our people. But I think if we just expand the story a little bit and realize that everything is we're the same as everything,
I love
right?
it.
So that might be a little more inclusive, perhaps.
Yes. Yes, I love
Yeah.
it. Great. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that with me.
Yeah. Well, amazing, Jordan. I really enjoyed this conversation.